I am Chris Lee of Southeastern14.com, joined by Blake Lovell. Blake, basketball season is a week underway. We have learned a few things in the SEC. We have learned that we have a lot of good teams, and let's start with those, and maybe some not so good. Let's start with the not so good as we do power rankings and speak about what has gone on so far. Let's start at the bottom. The Georgia Bulldogs, our number 14 team in our power rankings this week. And look, we expected this was going to be a rough year for Tom Crean, and I think that is proving to be true so far.
I mean, this is going to be the theme in every team we talk about. My stance is until you give me a reason to move you elsewhere than where we had them when we started the season, because we're only, 2 weeks into the season, I don't think it's necessary to just start throwing teams around all over the place, just, out of a wishful thinking or hoping that this is going to happen. I think it's just based on what you see. And with Georgia, I haven't seen anything to make me believe that, they should be much higher up the list or anything. So I think at this point, they lost that game to Cincinnati, but I mean, they've won a couple games, but against not great competition. So, I don't, the next two games are going to get Georgia Tech and Virginia. So Virginia's struggling, but if they win one of those, then we can probably have a discussion of moving them up. But
what, as a side note, what has happened to Virginia? My goodness.
I mean, it's something that I think that we've always kind of said with Virginia is, based on their style of play, I think there's much less room for error when it comes to how they play. And I think when you if you get behind or you put yourselves in those positions, it's much harder, I think, for a team like that to be able to just rally and put up 15 points in 3 minutes or something. I just think it's so much harder to do. And so I think that's going to be an issue, perhaps, as it always has been, I think. So.
Okay, we figured Georgia would be our 14th team. That was a pretty easy decision in preseason. Again, they stay there. I think the next three we had in some order were Missouri, South Carolina, A&M. I think we're going to go A&M 11, South Carolina 12, Missouri 13. Maybe a little separation between A&M and the other two. Missouri and South Carolina have both taken on bad losses already. Missouri's, was just awful. They were down to Kansas City by 20-something points in the second half. I mean, that was not good.
Well, I think, for Missouri, they have the worst loss, I think, of anyone. I think that's safe to say, just based on, like you said, how they played. Maybe I'm not giving South Carolina enough credit because they did beat Western Kentucky, and that's
not a bad win.
Western Kentucky team. Yeah, and I mean, that's a team that, has already played. I got to look it up here. I mean, they played Minnesota tough in that game a couple days before the one against South Carolina. So I think actually maybe, I am undervaluing South Carolina a little bit based on that win. But I think with A&M, I told you I went back and forth. At one point, I did say, I was like, I think Missouri may actually have the best ceiling if everything comes together. And let me just say, I'm not one to overreact to 2 or 3 games. I think it's ridiculous to just completely overreact to a couple games into a 35-game season. But you can see things, and you can start to form a little bit of an opinion based on what you can see. And I think for A&M, there's upside there. And I know you can look at their scores. There's not a whole lot of impressive about that, but I still think when you look at kind of what they have, whether it's Henry Coleman and guys like that you were kind of banking on having a big sort of impact for them. I can see their path to perhaps being in the middle of the pack somewhere, not necessarily an NCAA tournament team, but South Carolina maybe gets there. But, the same team that beats Western Kentucky loses to Princeton, and nothing against Princeton. But,
Not your daddy's Princeton.
Well, then they're just hard to trust. I mean, that's what it comes down to, inconsistency. And, we'll say that about a lot of teams this year. But that's, for now, 3 games in, that's fine.
Well, A&M, I watched the end of that game with Abilene Christian that went, I think, into double overtime, or maybe it was just 1 overtime. No, it was 2 now that I look. And if not for I'm not going to call it a miracle at the end of the game, but it was pretty close. They had to have a couple things go right in the last 6 seconds. They missed 2 free throws, knock it out of bounds. They get it back and hit a 3 that just beats the buzzer. Well, not just beats the buzzer. It was a second left. But still, Abilene Christian, a good team. A team that won a game in the NCAA tournament last year, has done some things in the Southland. But, if you're A&M, you'd prefer not to go to double OT.
Yeah, and I think that's, teams – we're going to say this about every team in this league. Teams are still figuring things out. Like, that applies to all 14 teams. Like, everyone from 14 to 1 everyone's still trying to figure some things out, and we've seen the potential with all these teams pretty much thus far, and we've seen, some of the things you could pinpoint and say, all right, that's got to be better if they want to get here or there. So yeah, I think you could say that about everybody.
Well, 10 is Vanderbilt. They're in our backyard. We both seen them play. Scottie Pippen just flat out carried them to a win the other night against Texas State. I think he gets 15 points in the final 7.5 minutes. They break open a close game and win by 19. Vanderbilt, I'm not going to say struggled with Alabama State in its opener, but it was tougher than it probably needed to be for a while. Anyway, Vandy stays at 10. The Commodores have got some key injuries to Rodney Chapman, who should have been their best backcourt defender, and to Liam Robbins, the 7-foot transfer from Minnesota who led the Big Ten in block shots, gives them a dimension they've not had since Luke Cornett left. I think Vandy right now a solid 10. Hard to argue moving them either up or down because I think there's a little bit of gap in front of them and maybe, depending on what A&M is, a little bit of a gap behind them.
Yeah, I don't really have a lot on Vanderbilt at this point because I think it's just they beat Alabama State and Texas State, but I think it's played out the way we said. They're going to be better. I think it's just how much better are they going to be, and maybe this week is probably a pretty good indicator, perhaps, of that. Really over the next, I guess, week and a half or so. They got VCU, Winthrop, Pitt. All those teams have been good at times, and I think the VCU game will be the toughest of the group, but. That's tonight or Wednesday as we're recording this. So I think that will probably tell us a little bit more about what the potential is. But until they get Chapman, Robbins, and those guys playing, I still think it's completely hard to know what to really going to get for them just outside of Scottie Pippen because, like we said, he's going to be player of the year race. And, at this point, he looks like the player of the year. So I think it's, a couple games in, no reason to move them much anywhere at this point.
Okay, right in front of Vanderbilt, number 9, Ole Miss, which is intriguing to me. I don't know a ton about their personnel. I haven't gotten to see them play yet. They have beaten New Orleans and Charleston Southern, 2 games they should have won easily and did win pretty easily. And I did not know this in the preseason. They apparently beat Ohio State in a secret scrimmage. OSU was ranked, so maybe that's a sign of where the season's headed. And right in front of them, Mississippi State. I think we could look back at the end of the season and say maybe we had both these teams ranked a little bit too. I think particularly Mississippi State, really the top 8 teams to me. Ole Miss kind of a tier on its own at 9 right now. Maybe you could argue Vandy. State is when teams start to separate from that 8-point down. But let's talk about the Magnolia State teams and what you've seen so far.
Yeah, Ole Miss has beaten 2, like you said, New Orleans and Charleston Southern. Nothing against them, but they're going to struggle this year, and yeah, that's kind of the takeaway for me. I don't. There's no way to get a good feel on Ole Miss yet. They'll play Marquette on Thursday. Then I think we can have a much bigger discussion about them and what perhaps they could do this season. Mississippi State, it's sort of a similar scenario, although they did pretty much demolish Montana, who will be in the race there. I would assume in the Big Sky. That's been a pretty decent program over the years. But I think it's kind of what we talked about with them. Iverson Molinar is going to be the guy that leads the way, but for them to kind of get what they can get out of Garrison Brooks, who I think he had 18 the first game, he had double-digit rebounds the second game. So that's a big part of what they're going to do. That's what it's going to come down to, and we've said that from the beginning. I think however he plays, he's going to be a big part of it. So is DJ Jeffries, who also has scored in double figures, I think, in one of those games. So. Those new guys getting acclimated, and I don't think we get a really great feel for Mississippi State until probably. They play Louisville next week, so that'll give us some sort of, I guess, idea of where they're at. But after that, they get a pretty good run after that of some quality teams like Minnesota, Colorado State. They play Georgia State. Furman's in there. So their non-conference schedule is actually probably a bit more appealing than it has been in years past at times. So we'll get a better idea of Mississippi State, I think, next week sometime.
Yeah, Garrison Brooks is a player that I had sort of circled as a wild card because his junior season at North Carolina, or whatever you call them these days, I don't even know what we call classes anymore with COVID, but the season he had 2 years ago and the season he had last year were very different seasons, and he pulls, 9-11 in that game against Montana where State kind of went to the bench. I think he only played 18 minutes. So that's kind of one that I'm watching. LSU, a team I think that is, I don't know if it's a pleasant surprise is a way to put it, but they've looked awesome so far at number 7.
They've looked great, and that's like you said. I mean, they're number 7, and if you're looking at the stats, you're probably thinking, why are they that low? I
Yeah.
mean, they beat UL Monroe 101-39. They beat that Texas State team, like we said, not bad team at all. I mean, they beat Liberty by 16.
And
Yeah,
scored
and maybe
74 points, which isn't easy against those guys.
no, and as I was saying, maybe we do have LSU too low, but it goes back to what we said. I mean, I'm just not, I'm not ready to just start overreacting to 2 or 3 game sample size. It's so hard to do, and like we said, that's where I think when you do the preseason rankings like we did, that's where I think switching and moving people around too far, it's just hard
Yeah.
to do. I think so short into like it's just there's a lot happening, and we know that there's a lot of mixing and matching and all that, but I think this next couple weeks for LSU, I think they've got a chance to jump into that top 4 in the SEC, top 3 maybe,
Mm.
because after they play this game against McNeese State, like look, I mean they've got Belmont, Penn State, Ohio, Georgia Tech, all top 100 teams right now in Ken Palm. And I want to say this too about Ken Palm. I love Ken Palm. I'm
Mhm.
a huge fan, but I think we should not go too far deep into things this early with Ken Palm because I think there needs to be way more data assembled just for this season. Because what can you do until you actually start to see the data come in from this year?
Yeah.
Because like we said in the SEC, like a lot of places, but really in the SEC, there are so many new faces. There are so many things that you can't really account for. I think from a data standpoint until there are more games played. So that's what I will say about that because I know again I always refer to it, but I do think it's kind of dangerous early on to just go all in and feel like the numbers are going to be able to tell you everything you need to know about where teams are at. So LSU very impressive, maybe too low. If I'm an LSU fan, I'd be fine if you want to argue that they are too low at this point. But like I said, it's not a knock on LSU. It's more of just we haven't really had a lot of reasons to move down in the other teams, and that's kind of where it's at. So
Yeah, and two things on Ken Palm, right? Right now, a lot of what is in the rankings is baked into it from his preseason opinion. So a team may legitimately be bad, but if Ken Palm thought they were good, there's still that weighting in there. Number two, last year we just had less sample size than we've ever had. We've had less interconnectivity between the conferences because of the abbreviated non-conference schedules. And so I just think right now that's a good point, and there's another layer on top of it with that. But yeah, LSU, I think that if we just went on what we've seen so far, LSU would be higher
yeah,
than 7th, but we want to be a little conservative. And here's the one where we're going to get hate mail from people. You know it. You're smiling already. Arkansas at 6. We both watched Arkansas. Look, if Eric Musselman winds up with like a Final Four team or either of us done, no. But we see some issues with them right now in their first 2 games. They've not looked great against Mercer or Gardner-Webb. And I think you factor that a little bit. I think we've got some questions about their front court a little bit. So I don't think we're quite as high on Arkansas after 2 games as we might have been a week ago, just based on watching them. That could change. So don't shoot the messenger just yet. But what is your take on them so far?
he's doing what he should be doing at this point, and that is he is seeing what he has. I think,
Mm-hmm.
and I think you look at that first game, like we said, they didn't play really well against Mercer. They played better against Gardner Webb. You went by 17, you'll take that for sure. But I think some of the problems were alleviated by the fact that they made 13 threes and they just shot the ball really well against Gardner Webb, which again, it's a win, but I mean, you look at kind of how that game played out. I mean, they played a lot of people, and it's because they did make a pretty big run there, of course, heading into I think it was whenever that was close to half. They made that big run and kind of got off to a slow start. But I think with Arkansas, we said it from the beginning. We would not be surprised at all if Arkansas was challenging for the SEC title, but I would also not be surprised if Arkansas is a team that it takes a little while to figure out what you have. And I think that's exactly what they're doing right now. They're trying out a lot of different things. You can see that with just the minutes and some of the things that they're doing. The guys we know are going to lead them have been leading them. But beyond that, I think that's where they're having to figure out, all right, how do we plug this guy in? Can this guy do this for us? Whatever. So, yeah, for Arkansas to be at 6, I'm sure not, Arkansas fans won't be thrilled with that. But it's more of, like we said, it's kind of, I was probably a little lower on Arkansas in the preseason than a lot of people were. It wasn't based on it was based on where we thought things would be in the preseason, like going into the season. And I think that, like I said, I feel like they're a team that it will take a little while to kind of figure out some things, but Can they get there? Of course they can, because like he usually makes it work, and I've always said that about what he can do with transfers. And I think it will take a little time, and I think that they will have a chance to get there. Right now, there are some other teams, and one team in particular that's kind of done a little bit more to move ahead of them. So
Yeah, and that one is Florida at number 5, which has the best win in the league so far. Smoked Florida State, which I know you are not sure that Florida State is as good as the hype, but regardless, still probably the league's best win so far. That they've looked really good in a couple of games.
no, they have. It is the best win for anyone thus far, and anytime for them to beat Florida State, we know what the streak was for
6,
Mike
wasn't
White.
it, or 5?
Yeah,
5, either
so
one. Yeah.
you've got to beat Florida State, and they finally did that, and so that's a big relief, I think, for them. And I mean, look, Florida always plays a very good non-conference schedule. I think you'll see that here, and like it's hard to predict non-conference schedules until injuries and all that. I mean, it can just change so much for all the teams. You can schedule as well as you can, and then maybe teams slip up and it doesn't look as good as it did before. But I think Florida, they look very, very good thus far. Colin Castleton, I mean, he's one of the top players in the league at this point. There's no doubt about it. And yeah, I think I just the Florida thing is, you can see what you've seen with them, but like it's always in the back of my head. I'm just thinking, all right, we've seen this before. Like we have seen them do this, and can they continue to do it? That is the question for me. And maybe that's not fair, because I am basing it on more than just the 2 games I've seen this season. But I think you kind of have to factor that in a little bit, because it's just the historical part of it is they haven't been very consistent. And now, if they can carry that consistency over and let's say win, beat Milwaukee, beat Cal, and so forth, then I think you start to be like, all right, maybe this team may actually have what it takes to win an SEC title.
Okay, Auburn at 4. Auburn, a little bit of a working process without Alan Flanagan, who we thought would probably be their best player coming into the year. But you look, and Wendell Green, the EKU transfer, has played really well in 2 games. Jabari Smith the other night goes for 23 and 10 with a couple of blocks and 4 steals. That's a fantasy basketball box score for you there. But, yeah, I mean, once we get to these Final Four teams, I think these are all teams that we could see in the Final Four right now. And so it becomes a little tough to figure out how to sort them out. Now, Walker Kessler, again, that's one, I hate to keep picking on that kid, but that's one where I said I want to see where this goes. All kinds of preseason hype for him. He goes the other night, he goes what? 2 points? So that's not – but, I mean, there's so much talent on that team, right? And, again, playing without Flanagan, that's a team like Arkansas. It's going to be very interesting to see where the pieces come together.
Yeah, I mean, he's got 8 blocks thus far, and I would say that's as valuable as anything. Perhaps when they don't need him to score, I think they've got to have some sort of, protection inside and all that. And I think that's where he comes into play, because Flanagan, once he comes back, he'll be a big part of that too, I think, just with his size and length. But yeah, I mean, again, no reason to move Auburn down, in my opinion. We talked about, Arkansas. I'm probably a little bit higher on Auburn than some were, but I just think that, it's the same reasoning. Like we talked about, like whether it's Alabama, Auburn, Arkansas, you just trust the coaches to figure it out at this point based on their track record. And that's why I said, even if we have Arkansas where we have them right now, which again, I mean, what does it even mean? We're 2 games into the season, but you trust the coaches to figure it out. And I think that once they get Flanagan back, you've seen how good they can be early on. And I know they played 2 opponents that, again, Morehead State, UL Monroe, they're not going to be catching a lot of, eyeballs.
Morehead did win the OVC last year.
They did.
The tournament, at least.
Every team changes, though. And I think that, you look at it that way. And, I mean, yeah, it's fine. And, again, if there's no reason for me to move you down at this point or move you up, then this is kind of where you are. And I think this is kind of what we settled on with them. The ceiling is there for them to win the SEC. It's just how does some of this other stuff come together?
Yeah, I think these top 4 teams are going to ping pong all year, because I don't know that there's – I mean, we're trying to make differentiations right now because that's what we do, and it's fun to do it and try to figure it out. But I don't know that there's going to be a lot of difference between these teams. Number 3, Tennessee's looked awfully good. They sure have got the guard situation figured out. What have you seen from the Vols so far?
Yeah, I mean, that win over East Tennessee State was very good. Again, that's not a bad team at all. They beat them by 32. very impressive. They look good offensively thus far, and that's what I think you can count on. But the thing with Tennessee is, I know we talked about like they are the top-rated SEC team in KenPom, but you know, let's talk after Villanova, I think, and
Yeah.
that's where I think we start to see, all right, here's the path for Tennessee, and this is where they're headed. Because remember too, their schedule. They got Villanova, they play Colorado, they got Texas Tech, Memphis,
Ooh.
Arizona. I mean, those are all games before you even get to the end of December. And so like we will know exactly where Tennessee's at within the next month. And I think that's a good thing because they have looked very good thus far. And hey, if you want to make the case that Tennessee's been the most impressive team in the SEC, I'm fine with that. But they have more questions, I think, to answer. But Kennedy Chandler's been fantastic, and yeah, and so has the supporting cast. So yeah, very very high on the Vols right now.
You've got Kentucky at 2. I pushed back a little bit on that, but I deferred to you, and I think you had a good point. We're not going to kill them for losing to Duke, a Duke team that's got some elite
Yeah.
talent if it's not suspended. Um, but in any case, I still don't think Kentucky's anywhere near fully formed. I mean, of course it's not. It's November, but you're a big believer in Kentucky, and I'm not saying you shouldn't be, but I might have argued Tennessee higher than Kentucky. Why we got Kentucky at 2?
I mean, again, I had Kentucky at 1 in the preseason,
Yes,
and
you did.
so if they lose to Duke by 8, they beat Robert Morris by 40, and they beat Mount St. Mary's by 25. Why should I drop them any?
Yeah,
Just because they lost in what was the best game for any team thus far in the SEC. They lose
yeah.
by 8 to the best opponent of anyone that anyone in the league has played. So that's just my justification. Again, do I think Kentucky's fully formed? Of course not. I don't think they're even close. But if that's where I had them to start the season, I can't really justify moving them down that far if their only loss is to a top 10 Duke team. So, and it wasn't like they were, blown out like they were or whatever several years ago with the Zion team or whatever. So, I think that's the justification. Sure, Kentucky's got a lot to work on, but I think again you can see. I mean, Sheboy is just an absolute monster. You can see what is possible with Wheeler and Washington and Grady and all those guys. So I think that's it. Like Kentucky, you're just banking on. They have a pretty tough game against Ohio though on
Yeah.
Friday. Like that's an interesting game too. So that I think is one to definitely watch. And if Kentucky loses that one, hey, then we're dropping Kentucky down because that's an Ohio team that's already beaten Belmont, Cleveland State, two very good mid-major teams, and they beat that Robert Morris team too that Kentucky beat. So I think that is a big game for Kentucky to kind of give us an idea of where they're at. So.
Okay, number 1 in the rankings, and I guess we'll stick with it, although last night wasn't a resounding vote of confidence against your favorite mid-major coach, Richie Riley, in South Alabama. That Alabama game was closer than it needed to be. Alabama, though, does improve to 3-0. And speaking of about to run the gauntlet, here's your first 3 games in December, Crimson Tide: Gonzaga, Houston, Memphis. 3 top 15 KenPom teams right now. Gonzaga number 1. Guard play continues to look fantastic. As I've said, you name me a better 3 guards in the country than what they've got. Bediako hit a couple of huge foul shots for them last night down the stretch. Don't want to overact to one game, so we'll kind of leave the Tide at where our gut feeling is, but you want to see a little better finish than they had on Tuesday night.
Yeah. I mean, the defending champions, like we said, that carries a lot of weight with where we had them in the preseason. And, they did beat Louisiana Tech just, like a drum. But then, of course, Louisiana Tech came back 3 days later and beat Jackson State by 2. So, how good is Louisiana Tech? I don't know. But they did, they certainly played well against South Dakota State. South Alabama, one of those teams with Richie Riley, they've been known to force turnovers. That's exactly what they did, just with how they play defense. Alabama turned it over 22 times. So was not the most impressive performance, but full clarity, like we kind of had them slotted here. Like right before that game, we're just like, is there any reason really to move them back after just, again, a 5-point win? I don't think so. And so, yeah, I mean, I think you said it a minute ago, and I think you said it the best way. You could make the case for, you said 4, like I think you can even make the case for maybe 5 or 6 teams right now to say, that team has been the most impressive team I've seen in the SEC to this point. And that is what you get 2 games into the season or 3 games into the season is you can, based on the competition, some teams have played better competition than others, but you kind of get some good clarity on, what you're going up against from whether it's mid-major teams or whatever. But I think it's much harder to kind of, absolutely just pinpoint one team and say, all right, like that hasn't been the case thus far in the SEC, because I think there's just so many good teams, and that's what we kind of talked about going into the season. So
yeah, my feeling right now is this league is as top heavy with a good number of teams as it's been in a long time. It is as solid in the middle as I remember it in a long time.
I think the top 8 are going to be as good of a top 8 as we've seen
yes.
in many years.
And let's not count out Ole Miss yet at 9.
Yeah, right. And they could be 9. Yeah, yeah.
And even I don't think Vanderbilt belongs in that discussion, but if Vanderbilt gets healthy, that's a team that could go to the NIT and make it interesting. I mean, when your number 10 team in the SEC is a legitimate IT team, maybe if it's healthy, I mean, that says a lot too. But yeah, don't hate us too much. We're going to make you mad at some point. But remember, if you feel like your team's getting slighted, there's just so many good teams in this league. There's not a lot of information yet to be able to sort it out with confidence. We do the best we can. This will change from week to week. That's the fun of it. And I just can't wait for this season to play out, Blake.
Yeah, and I do want to point out, we talked about Ken Palm quickly, but if you look, and this will obviously change, but I do find this fascinating early in the season. If you look at the projected SEC win totals, there are 6 teams within one game of each other. So Tennessee at 12-6, Arkansas 12-6, and you got Kentucky, Alabama, Florida, Auburn all at 11-7. So that kind of, I think, gives you a gauge of where teams are at right now and how maybe close together, at least the data that we have thus far, kind of assumes that they're going to be at. So,
and if you want to go a step further, you got Ole Miss and Mississippi State both at 9-9. So that's 3 games.
And LSU at 10-8. So,
yeah, I mean that's what? That's 9 teams all within 3 games of first place. That's crazy.
Yeah.
But it's going to be that kind of year, and frankly, it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yep, it will be.
All right, for Blake Lovell, I'm Chris Lee at Southeastern 14. Thanks for watching this. We'll be back with more videos coming in the next few days.